My entitled sisters tried to exclude me from my father's funeral and turned everyone against me, but they regretted everything real quick when I refused to pay for the funeral. Let me start by telling you about the time my sisters sabotaged my business. My 3 sisters showed up to my meeting with a client and just started telling false stories about me, like the time I bullied a girl in high school. I lost that client and took a big hit, but thankfully I have recovered now, at the expense of my relationship with my sisters. Ever since we became teenagers, they have hated me with a passion. It started when they found out that I had dumped my ex-girlfriend at the time on the side of the road because she cheated on me. They are hardcore feminists, and in their eyes, her cheating was my fault and I should have treated her better. It only got worse when they realized that our political views were quite different, since all of them supported the left. However, in front of our parents they would act like perfect siblings. They would do stuff like bringing me water, talking about how nice they were to their brother. They never let our mom and dad get even the slightest hint about how much they despised me. They didn't want them worrying about us, which sure, I also agree with. But as soon as our parents turned their eyes, my sisters would berate me and call me a clown for trying to create my own business. This is why I inevitably drifted away from them, because my parents had raised me to love and support the family. They supported me when I started my business, and always reminded me to never forget about my family. I knew that if I stayed around my sisters, I would end up hating him, and I left to live on my own when I was 24. Eventually, things started to change because my father was suffering from Alzheimer's and needed constant medical attention. This is also when my mother fell sick and needed money for her medical procedures. My sisters never completed college, and one of them still lived in our parents' house, so obviously they couldn't help. I offered to pay in full and never asked for help in covering the bills, because I loved them and wanted to do this for them. But every time I went back home, my sisters would berate me. They would call me a dirty capitalist who oppresses people to make my money. I tried explaining that my business is very fair, and I try my best not to hurt anyone, but they just laughed at me and called it a joke. Besides, sometimes they would tell me to send more money than required for the bill so that they could buy expensive stuff. Things like steak dinners, birthday gifts or even full-on vacations. I didn't mind my sisters using my money, since they were technically taking care of our parents while I was busy. And of course, I still loved them as my siblings. But these comments about me being lucky and oppressive were really getting to me. During this time, neither my parents nor my sisters even thanked me for helping them with money. And I wish I had paid more attention to that lack of gratitude, because it would come to haunt me in the future. This is when unfortunately, my father passed away due to old age. I wasn't prepared at all, because my mother was the same age and I wasn't ready to lose her too. I immediately went back home and made sure she knew I was there for her. I also told my sisters that they didn't have to worry about the funeral, and I would pay for the whole thing. I just wanted everyone to not be stressed during this time of grief. I guess it worked since literally the next day, I saw my sisters planning a very luxurious funeral. They were pushing the budget I gave to its absolute limit. They wanted imported flowers everywhere, and wanted everyone to follow a strict dress code. I decided to leave the logistics to them since I was still coming to terms with losing my father. But then, a couple days later, I got the worst news of my life. It turns out that my sisters didn't want me to be the one who did the eulogy. In our culture, it's always the son who does the eulogy, so the fact that they listed their own names instead of mine was a blatant disrespect to me. I raised my voice and argued with them, asking why they would do this. They said it's not a big deal, and it's just something they want to do. I said that I also want to do this, and they should have asked me before excluding me from such an honor. They chuckled and said it's not like I deserve to speak at the funeral, and told me to shut up. That's when I knew that talking with them was pointless. Instead, I decided to talk to our relatives who had shown up for the funeral and my mother, and ask them to reason with my sisters. To my horror, I found out something that still disgusts me. My relatives had all turned against me, and were calling me an ungrateful jerk. They told me I had no right to say anything because I didn't take care of my sick father. They said that my sisters did everything, and stayed with him every day of the week. Apparently, they didn't know it was me who was paying the medical bills. My sisters or mother had never mentioned anything to them, except that I didn't care about my father. It was heartbreaking, but not as heartbreaking as when I decided to put everything aside for the sake of peace, only to discover they didn't want me to hold the casket either. I was just supposed to pay for everything and then sit in the back, like a effing dog. I cried for an entire night before my businessman persona took over. First, I decided that I would no longer be paying for the funeral, or anything from here on out. I stopped all the monthly payments that were going to my mother and sisters. I knew that if I went to the funeral, I would be shunned just like the last few days. So I sent them a text about my decision and left with my wife and kids. They started blowing up my phone like never before. I think every relative including my sisters sent me at least 15 texts, ranging from calling me a pig to begging for me to reconsider. I told them all, it's clear that you don't want me there, so I will leave you alone and hold a private funeral for my father. My father had always confided in me about how he wished to travel to his home country in South America when he was young. I couldn't fulfill his wish then, but I could at least try it now. I took my wife, my kids, as well as a few elderly friends of my dad on that trip. All this while my sisters were texting me their apologies, saying that they made a mistake and wanted me to keep sending them money. I replied with laughing emojis and started preparing the tribute for my father. It was still a luxurious funeral, but only with people I trusted. I said a few words of goodbye to him and thanked him for raising me into the man I was today. Although I did make a joke about his 25% success rate, since his kids turned out to be vindictive losers.